You know, usually when we talk about a massive global controversy in sports, there's a certain expectation of what that looks like.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You expect the typical highlight reel drama.
Right, like a violent studs-up tackle, or maybe a blown referee call in stoppage time, or a player just storming off the pitch in an absolute rage. We expect noise. We expect chaos.
Yeah, something that forces the commentators to start shouting.
Exactly. But today, we're zooming in on June 14th, 2026, so picture it. We are at NRG Stadium in Houston. Germany has just, absolutely dismantled Curaçao 7-1 in the World
A
Cup.
total blowout.
Yeah. The final whistle blows, and the viral moment that everyone is furiously debating right now, it didn't feature a ball, it didn't feature a foul. It was literally 30 seconds of complete stillness.
It's a really striking, almost jarring image to see in the middle of a World Cup broadcast.
It really is. You see German players, including midfielder Felix Nmecha and defender Jonathan Tah, walking to midfield, linking arms with players from the Curaçao national team, bowing their heads and forming a prayer circle.
Right there on the grass.
Right. And just like that, those 30 seconds ignited a massive multinational culture clash. You handed us a huge stack of sources today. Everything from FIFA rulebooks to German opinion columns, Spanish sports dailies, viral social media videos.
There's a lot to unpack.
There is. So our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the noise of this culture war and figure out why the exact same 30 seconds of footage basically broke the internet in 3 completely different ways.
Well, to understand the sheer scale of the media fallout, we first have to establish the physical reality of what actually happened on the pitch.
Right, the rules.
Exactly. Because before we can debate the philosophy of a secular public square, we need to look at the mechanics of the game itself.
Okay, so let me throw an analogy at you based on the FIFA rulebook excerpts in our sources,
Yeah.
because the very first thing fans were asking online was, why didn't the referee step in and stop it?
Right, that was a huge question.
So think about clocking out of a shift at an office or a factory. While you are on the clock, you wear the company uniform, you follow the manual, and your boss dictates your actions.
Makes sense.
But the second you punch that time card at 5:00 p.m., your time is your own. If you want to go stand in the company parking lot and pray or do yoga or call your mom, management really can't stop you. I have to assume the final whistle functions exactly like that time clock.
That analogy actually perfectly captures how the International Football Association Board, or IFAB, structures the game.
Okay.
The referee's authority is absolute, but it operates on a strictly defined timer. It begins the moment the ball is kicked, covers the 90 minutes, and extends through stoppage time.
So the clock is literally everything.
Completely. The instant that final whistle blows, the referee's jurisdiction essentially evaporates. Barring any acts of physical violence or an intentional delay of a subsequent event like a trophy presentation.
So basically, unless they are throwing punches or refusing to leave the field for the next match, the players are untouchable. There is no foul to call and no yellow card to give.
The underlying logic of the rule book is neutrality through non-interference. As long as an action is voluntary, doesn't delay stadium operations, and doesn't involve a political or religious slogan printed directly on the match kit itself, players are entirely free to express their personal faith.
Wow.
Yeah. To give you an idea of how distinct this is from the actual match, Felix Nmecha walked off the team bus in Houston openly carrying a Bible. That's pre-game territory. The referee has zero authority over what happens in the tunnel or off the bus.
Which honestly explains Felix Nmecha's post-game press conference. He was incredibly straightforward about his mindset.
Very unapologetic.
Yeah, he told reporters, quote, "In the game we are opponents, but after the game we are all Christians and brothers. We simply said a little prayer together because we are all very grateful."
It's a very simple explanation from his perspective.
And for you listening, we should note, this wasn't an isolated Houston incident. The sources highlight that the U.S. men's national team did something incredibly similar after beating Paraguay 4-1.
Right, and pointing to the U.S. men's national team reveals something really crucial about this controversy.
What's that?
The friction didn't originate from FIFA headquarters. It was entirely manufactured in the press boxes and the broadcast booths.
Ah, okay. This is where the cultural psychology gets fascinating. Because the exact same 30 seconds of video was beamed to televisions around the globe. But the cultural filters applied to that video were radically different.
Radically different. Let's look at the U.S. reaction first.
Right. The U.S. media reaction was essentially a giant warm embrace. The coverage leaned heavily into the faith aspect, treating it as this profound moment of sportsmanship.
Well, the American sports media ecosystem has a long history of elevating wholesome, faith-based narratives. It taps into a broader cultural appreciation for athletes who display humility and gratitude.
You could definitely see that appreciation everywhere online. There were these viral videos with text overlays reading, "Win or lose, Jesus gets the glory." Public figures like Andrew Giuliani were tweeting, "God bless the America," specifically in response to the U.S. team's prayer circle.
Which is a very typical response in that ecosystem.
It is. And it's tempting to look at that U.S. coverage and think, oh, this is just a simple binary of American evangelicalism versus European secularism. But your sources on Spanish media completely shatter that binary.
They really do.
Because they aren't throwing a parade for faith, but they certainly aren't punishing it either.
No, Spanish football culture breaks the mold entirely because deeply embedded Catholic traditions permeate everyday life there. In La Liga, public faith doesn't trigger a culture war. It acts as background noise. It is just the accepted norm.
So it's basically just part of the architecture of the game. Broadcasters don't even blink when a player makes the sign of the cross before taking a penalty kick.
Not at all. The visuals are everywhere. You see Athletic Bilbao holding group tunnel prayers at Santa Mays before they even step onto the grass.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, it's routine. Superstars like Vinicius Jr., Luka Modric, and Robert Lewandowski visibly cross themselves before kickoff. Karim Benzema famously points to the sky after scoring a goal, which is a gesture universally recognized in Spain as dedicado a Dios, dedicated to God.
So I assume the major Spanish outlets like Marca or AS aren't writing fiery op-eds about Benzema pointing to the sky.
Definitely not. They report it as a plain, boring fact.
Yeah.
The mechanics of the Spanish press just reflect the country's history. Generations of fans and players have grown up with these symbols.
It's just part of the culture.
Exactly. The grandmas in the stands are crossing themselves, so the players on the pitch are crossing themselves. It is tradition, totally devoid of controversy.
Which brings us to a massive cultural wall. Because in Spain, it's unquestioned tradition. In the U.S., it's enthusiastically celebrated. But the mainstream German sports media didn't celebrate it. And they certainly didn't ignore it like the Spanish press.
No, they took a very different approach. Let's examine the mechanics of German culture here. There is a deeply rooted concept of Trennung von Kirche und Staat, the separation of church and state.
But wait, the U.S. has a separation of church and state too, and they love the prayer circle, so there must be a different mechanism at play in Germany.
There is. It comes down to how that separation translates into everyday social behavior. In German culture, there is a fierce compartmentalization between public duty and private belief.
Okay, compartmentalization.
Right. Religion is widely considered a private Angelegenheit, a strictly private matter. The societal expectation is that faith belongs in your home or your place of worship. It is not something you broadcast at your workplace.
And for a professional footballer, the pitch is their workplace.
Exactly.
That compartmentalization really explains the incredible restraint we saw from the mainstream German sports media. I mean, outlets like Sky, Kicker, and Bild, they didn't hype up the prayer circle, but they didn't condemn it either.
They kept it very factual.
Yeah, Bild referred to it as a curiosen scene, a curious scene. Randa D quoted Nmecha's comment about the Bible circle with the opponent directly without any editorializing. Curious scene is such a polite, distinctly German way to say, we don't really know what to do with this display.
It really is. So the mainstream sports press maintained their neutrality, but the country's left-leaning secular press completely abandoned that restraint. And this brings us to the core conflict of our deep dive.
Okay, I have to read this headline from the Tageszeitung, or TAZ, because it is undeniably the most provocative piece of media in our entire stack of sources.
It's a strong one.
The headline was Fußballprofi mit Christusfimmel, Platzverweis für Jesus. Let's break down the language there, because Christusfimmel sounds incredibly loaded.
It is a deliberate, highly provocative word choice. Fimmel translates roughly to an obsession, a craze, or even a fetish.
Oh, wow, a fetish.
Yeah. TAZ is specifically framing Nmecha's actions not as normal devotion, but as something excessive and almost theatrical.
And the second half of the headline, Platzverweis für Jesus.
Red card for Jesus, or literally a sending off from the pitch.
A red card for Jesus. Talk about drawing a line in the sand.
TAZ operates on a very clear philosophical stance. The football pitch must remain a secular public space. In their view, these post-game prayer circles aren't innocent private devotion.
What do they see them as, then?
They view them as an unwelcome import of U.S.-style evangelical culture bleeding into German football. The locker room is the space for your private Angelegenheit, The pitch is solely for the sport.
I have to push back on this framework on behalf of the fans listening, though. If you scroll through the comments on these viral videos, you see a completely different sentiment.
Oh, absolutely.
Fans constantly complain about players acting like quote-unquote rich gangsters. They are exhausted by athletes obsessed with flashy sports cars, designer clothes, rap beefs, social media scandals.
It's a common complaint.
Right. And then you have Felix Nmecha taking 30 seconds to quietly bow his head and show gratitude. Isn't that exactly the kind of grounded, humble, role model behavior society claims to want from athletes? Why draw the battle lines over a quiet prayer?
Well, that is the exact counter-argument conservative fans are making.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the underlying fear driving TAZ's editorial board. What terrifies them is the slippery slope of normalization.
Okay, let's test that slippery slope argument, because it reminds me of when sports leagues introduced charity initiatives, like wearing a special colored ribbon on the kit.
That's a great comparison.
It always starts as a completely voluntary gesture of goodwill, but within 2 seasons, it becomes an unspoken mandate. If one single player decides not to wear the ribbon, they get absolutely dragged by the press for making a, quote, statement, even if they just wanted to focus on the game. Is TAZ worried about that kind of corporate culture creep?
That captures their fear perfectly. Today, it's a voluntary 30-second prayer circle among a few players. But tomorrow, TAZ worries that clubs or sponsors might start pressuring players to join in because it looks good for public relations.
Right, like it becomes a PR requirement.
Exactly. Eventually, the pitch loses its neutrality entirely, and it transforms into a space where players feel obligated to perform their faith for the cameras just to avoid being ostracized. For the secular press, the only way to prevent that creep is to demand that the pitch remains 100% neutral from the start.
The problem with demanding a perfectly neutral public square is that it opens you up to massive accusations of hypocrisy online. And this brings us to the complex and, frankly, fascinating history of Felix Nmecha and the German national team.
A very tangled web.
It is. And we want to be incredibly clear here for everyone listening.
Yeah.
We are analyzing this purely through the lens of media reaction. We aren't taking a side in this culture war, but we have to lay out the context so you can understand why the internet is so fiercely divided over this specific player.
Context is everything here, because Nmecha is a player whose personal and religious journey has been scrutinized under a microscope.
Let's slow down and track this timeline carefully because your sources highlight a deeply complex journey. We just discussed a headline calling for a red card for Jesus, but looking at the articles from 2023, he was speaking to the German press about converting to Islam. Walk me through this whiplash.
Yeah, it is a profound, highly public spiritual evolution. Nmecha actually played for England's youth national teams before switching his allegiance to Germany in 2023.
Okay.
Around that same time, he spoke very openly to the German press about finding inner peace through Islam. Outlets like Bild and FAZ covered his conversion extensively, primarily because it's really rare for a high-profile Bundesliga player to discuss their spiritual searching so openly.
But that period of open discussion quickly turned into a media firestorm, right?
It did. Shortly after those interviews, old social media activity surfaced where he had liked posts regarding LGBTQ+ positions that clashed with mainstream German values.
Oh, I see.
The backlash was immense. It sparked intense debates in outlets like Süddeutsche and Deutschlandfunk about free speech, religion, and the mechanics of cancel culture in modern football. He eventually apologized for those old likes, but now, in 2026, he has experienced another spiritual shift and is out on the pitch publicly quoting Christian beliefs.
Okay, so the fans are taking this incredibly messy narrative and contrasting it directly with the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Let's rewind for a second. In 2022, the German team wanted to wear the LGBTQ+ One Love captain's armband.
Right, they wanted to make a statement.
But FIFA threatened them with sporting sanctions and yellow cards. So in protest, the entire German starting 11 covered their mouths for the pre-game team photo.
Manuel Neuer articulated the team's stance clearly at the time. He stated the gesture was about sending a message that they were being silenced by the governing body.
Look at the sheer whiplash of the media reaction here. In 2022, TAZ praised the mouth-covering protest. They framed it as a courageous, necessary moral stance.
They fully supported it.
Meanwhile, conservative fans complained bitterly that the national team was too focused on political activism. When Germany got knocked out in the group stage, those fans claimed the team went home early because they were distracted by politics.
And fast forward to 2026, and the roles have completely inverted.
A total 180-degree flip. Now you have conservative fans praising Nmecha, arguing that he is finally showing authentic values on the pitch. Meanwhile, TAZ, the same outlet that praised the 2022 protest, is the one aggressively demanding that politics and personal ideology be kept entirely off the grass.
The contrast highlights just how subjective the idea of a neutral pitch really is. People tend to champion a player's right to use their platform only when the message aligns with their own worldview.
Exactly.
And add to that, the double standard debate goes even deeper when you introduce the comparison with Muslim players.
Yeah. The sources bring up the sujood. This is the Islamic act of prostration, where a player kneels and touches their forehead to the ground. High-profile players like Mesut Ozil, Mohamed Salah, and Riyad Mahrez have frequently performed the sujood after scoring a goal.
A very common sight in global football.
Right. So the test people are applying online is whether TAZ would ever publish a headline demanding a red card for Allah.
Well, the secular press would argue that their editorial line is entirely consistent. Their foundational stance is that all religion belongs in the locker room, regardless of whether it's Christian, Muslim, or otherwise.
Okay.
They have a documented history of criticizing the influence of public Islam in other societal contexts outside of sports.
But critics aren't necessarily arguing about the overarching philosophy, though. They are pointing to the specific aggressive language used.
True, the linguistic contrast is striking. When a player fasts for Ramadan or performs a quick sujood after a goal, the German secular press generally reports the physical action factually, or perhaps writes a restrained column about the complexities of private faith in public life.
Which makes sense.
But deploying a word like Christus Fimmel, labeling a prayer a fetish or an obsession, critics argue that language is uniquely hostile. They suggest that a viral, organized Christian prayer circle triggers a much harsher, more visceral response from the secular press than a solitary moment of Islamic prostration.
So what does this all mean for you, the person who just wants to turn on their TV and watch a football match?
That's the big question.
With all these cultural tensions laid completely bare, from La Liga grandmas viewing the sign of the cross as background noise, to TAZ demanding an impenetrable secular pitch, to the messy overlap of player authenticity and double standards, what is the actual reality on the ground?
Well, while the opinion columnists are fighting a war of words in print, the television broadcasters have actually already held their vote.
And they voted with their camera.
Precisely. Fox Sports in the United States, ARD and ZDF in Germany, the BBC in the United Kingdom, none of them cut away during that prayer in Houston. They kept the live feed rolling.
The old rule of thumb in sports broadcasting used to be to immediately cut away from anything religious or political so you don't alienate any segment of the audience.
Exactly. Keep it neutral. But by refusing to cut away, these global networks have effectively made a definitive ruling. These expressions of faith, these raw, unscripted post-match moments, are officially part of the modern game.
Broadcasters know that in the age of social media, the clip is going to be on Instagram and TikTok 30 seconds later anyway. If the network cuts away, they just look out of touch.
Right.
They're attempting to edit history in real time, and the audience always notices.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from the diverse perspectives in your sources. Whether you agree with TAZ that the 120-yard stretch of grass should be a rigidly enforced neutral zone, or whether you believe players like Felix Nmecha should be allowed to express their complex, authentic selves without borders, the players themselves are currently voting with their feet.
Nmecha walked out to midfield. The Curaçao players joined him without hesitation. The U.S. men's national team did the exact same thing against Paraguay. They didn't ask permission from the media, and the referees under IFAB rules had no jurisdiction to stop them.
The rulebook allows it, the broadcast cameras are documenting it, and the athletes are confidently claiming that space for themselves.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to think about. We started this deep dive looking at a 30-second prayer circle in Houston that sparked a massive global debate.
We did.
But as athletes continue to realize the immense power of their platforms, and as broadcasters realize they simply cannot afford to look away, we have to ask, does the idea of a secular, perfectly neutral public square in global sports even exist anymore?
Or was the concept of a space completely free from cultural and ideological influence always just an illusion?
It's entirely possible the football pitch has simply become the world's biggest, most visible mirror for our own cultural divides, something to chew on the next time you hear that final whistle blow.